Your opinion piece published this past Friday was titled, quote, "Musk will be as hated by leftists as Trump." We just heard about the coordinated violent protests planned for Tesla dealerships across the country. Why so much hate for Elon Musk now?
Yeah, the hypocrisy of the left is astonishing on this, because you only have to go back in time a few weeks where the left was cheering Twitter, and they were cheering the idea that Twitter censored certain voices. And now that Twitter is actually being open to voices, it's astonishing to me that now these same parties are calling out Twitter and Elon Musk as the big bad fascist, when all he is doing is opening that platform for free speech. And that right there is the answer to your question. The left cannot tolerate free speech and dissenting opinions, because everything that they advocate falls in the face of facts.
And they like groupthink, don't they? It's
absolutely
it's
collectivism.
Tribal. Yeah.
Yes.
Earlier we reported on Tennessee's private school voucher law and how some U.S. Department of Education officials blame white supremacy. Well, they blame nearly everything on white supremacy. Are parents getting their rights back in America's education system?
They are, and pardon the laughing, but I was listening to that clip, and I was listening to this woman liken white supremacy to her weight, and I just don't get the logic. I really don't. But as for parents getting back their parental rights, in my own state of Virginia, we saw how parents, just a few at the beginning, and then it rose to this big swell of parents rising up and demanding their school board listen to them. And it got so loud in Virginia that, of course, we had the red wave down in Richmond that brought in the Republican governor and Republican leadership. So parents, if they're willing to make the fight, if they're willing to stand up to their school boards and make the case, can indeed and will indeed win back their rights.
So that's really where the red wave should have been, not looking for it in Washington. It should have been in every local community in your state houses. Interesting. Made me think there. Where can we find out about your Bold and Blunt podcast?
At WashingtonTimes.com, or you can get it wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay. Well, I encourage people to get it. Cheryl Chumley will be back with you in just a moment, if you would hang around, and I'll pass it back to you, Mike.
Greg, hundreds of Chinese-made drones have been detected in restricted airspace around the White House, the Capitol, and the Pentagon in recent months, according to reports. As a result, government officials are scrambling for answers concerning possible Chinese espionage. According to a report in Politico on Wednesday, officials at the Senate Homeland Security, Commerce, and Intelligence Committees have been briefed on the disturbing situation by drone industry experts and other U.S. officials. The Chinese company DJI is the manufacturer of 75% of the world's drone market. U.S. lawmakers and security officials have expressed concerns about the possibility of drone usage in new forms of espionage, cyber attacks, and other national security risks. On Friday, the Federal Communications Committee made a unanimous decision to ban new imports and the sale of Chinese-made and China-owned communications equipment made by Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE. The FCC also restricted the use of some China-made video surveillance systems, citing an unacceptable risk to national security. Brandon Carr, the senior Republican on the Federal Communications Commission, tweeted the bans announced Friday. In part, it says, quote, "Today, the FCC takes an unprecedented step to safeguard our networks and strengthen America's national security." China has erupted with rare public protests over the country's restrictions as record-breaking case numbers have led to heightened lockdowns. Protesters have stormed the streets of Beijing as well as the western Xinjiang region, calling for the government to lift its restrictions ahead of schedule. Chants of "end the lockdown" were heard, as well as China's national anthem with the lyrics "Rise up, those who refuse to be slaves." A major contributor to the unrest was a fire in a high-rise building that killed 10 people, including 3 children, and that happened on Thursday night. Some residents were unable to escape in time because the building was partially locked down due to COVID. The approximately 4 million residents of Urumqi have been under some of the country's strongest and longest lockdowns and were barred from leaving their homes for up to 100 days. In Shanghai, crowds of demonstrators could be heard shouting, "Demand freedom." In others, Xi Jinping could be heard, followed by "Step down."
Now, we just heard about the Chinese-made drones flying around in Washington, D.C. China's returned to brutal lockdowns. Meanwhile, few have heard, if any, about the communist regime's One Belt, One Road initiative. You wrote about it recently. Tell us what it is.
I wrote about it. I had a couple podcasts on it. I've written about it several times, and I'm going to write about it more because the One Belt, One Road initiative is one of the biggest dangers facing America in terms of our ability to keep our freedoms, and it's underreported in the press or outright ignored. And what it is, advocates say it's an infrastructure project, but what it is really is a cultural and military takeover by China of powers around the world. China goes into poorer nations and they offer financial incentives to help these countries grow. And then, of course, here comes the stick with that carrot. You have to allow the communist presence on your soil. And so as communism is spreading around America, under this feckless administration we have right now called Joe Biden is doing little, if nothing, to stop it.
Yeah, and they're spreading the tentacles further. Even though some Republicans now support it, many are sounding the alarm over the so-called, quote, Respect for Marriage Act, saying it fails to protect people who hold a traditional view of marriage. What say you?
Yeah, this is sort of putting the horse after the cart or the horse before the cart. I thought we already had from the Supreme Court the mandate on states to recognize same-sex marriages. And so now we have legislators emboldened by the Supreme Court coming forward and trying to mandate and legislate further. And I predict if this were to pass in its current form without Lee amendment, what would happen is churches would be in a position of having to worry about the government interfering in their business if pastors or preachers or religious leaders in their churches refuse to marry same-sex people. This is an attack on religious freedom, which, of course, is the foundation of America.
Well, let's go back to that just for a second then. Should the government be involved at all in marriage?
Well, I don't have a problem with the government mandating that same-sex couples have equal protections when they go to visit each other, say, in the hospital, or certain IRS protections. But I don't think the government is the one who created marriage. God is the one that created marriage. He did it very early on, Adam and Eve, in his creations. And I don't think the government should be involved with watering down or changing what God's definition of marriage is.
I know some pastors in California that are doing only biblical marriages. This is their way to get around it. We'll do a marriage with a Bible, but you have to go to the justice of the peace to get it done by the state. All right, the Biden administration has pulled air marshals from protecting our skies to do so-called humanitarian efforts along the southern border. Does it make sense to lower security on airlines in order to let more illegal immigrants in this country?
Of all the border actions this administration is taking, this is one of the most ridiculous. It doesn't make sense to jeopardize Americans' freedoms by taking from one to give to the border. And it certainly doesn't do anything toward enhancing our border security. We have a siege going on right at the border right now. And it's the fault of this administration that so many illegals are pouring into America right now. Now guaranteeing their safe passage is only going to make things worse.
Cheryl, before we go, tell us again how to catch the Bold and Blunt podcast.
Thanks. WashingtonTimes.com, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.